Well, hello and welcome to week 6. Yes, week 6 of Liturgies and Pentecostal ministry. This means that we have 3 more weeks to go. We actually only have 2 more weeks of class, and then you have your last week to finish up your paper. Let me just talk about a couple of announcements and some other assignment items that I want to share before I get into this week's discussion on the Lord's Supper. First of all, don't forget you do have a paper due at the end of the week, and don't make this assignment harder than it is. This is a simple reflection on one of the first 3 chapters. You choose which one of the first 3 chapters of Dan's book. I'm just asking for a reflection. I'm asking for really 4 elements of that. Give me just a synopsis of the chapter, something that goes beyond perhaps what you offered in the discussion during that 1 or 2 or 3rd week. And then after just getting my synopsis, give me some of your insights. For instance, how did this chapter make you feel? What questions did it spark in you that you might want to answer? And so with that, there's 2 more elements. Basically, share with me what you agree about the book and perhaps what you disagree about the book. That's okay. You can disagree with our text. There's nothing wrong with that. And so those 4 elements will help you, I think, structure your paper and get this in a timely manner. Don't forget you're going to need the cover sheet, which is formatted for you on the syllabus page. Use that format. No fancy cover sheets. And get this in as soon as you can, because I want to grade these and get these back to you to show you what I'm looking for in your final paper. In this reflection paper that's due this week, I don't want any quotes from Dan. I'm not asking you to quote Dan. I'm asking you to engage Dan. So if you put long quotes to fill up your paper, I'll probably mark off on that, okay? So be careful with the quotes. And that even goes with the research paper that's due coming up. Let's just talk about that for a moment. First of all, you should be well on your way to researching that paper. I am not asking you to put in big quotes from your sources, wherever they may be. What I'm asking you is to engage those sources. And you're going to want to have those from either ATLA articles that you find online, or if you have access to a library, Theological books and other articles that you can get. Remember, you get these sources from theological sources. Do not give me something online that you just pull from some pastor. That will be a big no-no, okay? And you'll get deducted for that. And so you should be well on your way with that. And speaking of that, remember that I do not take papers late. That final paper has to be in by the due date, because I get those graded and I get the whole class graded, and then I turn in the grades to the seminary. And once I turn in the grades, I can't change them. You can't just offer me a paper or something. You'll have to work through the seminary for that. And so just keep that in mind. Well, let's talk about Dan's chapter on the Lord's Supper. This is a very important chapter for me. Actually, it's a very important subject for me. And before I get too much into the discussion, I would like to say that what inspired me, what led me to go deeper into liturgical and sacramental theology was the resource that I'm going to share with you this week that's subsequent to Dan's book, and that is a book that Dr. Chris Green wrote for his dissertation towards a Pentecostal theology of the Lord's Supper. Now, I was introduced to this when I graduated from the seminary. I was getting my Master of Divinity, and Dr. Green was getting his doctorate from Bangor College, which is through the seminary. And when they introduced his paper towards a Pentecostal theology of the Lord's Supper, I was sitting there, I remember it, I'm going like, what? Is there a theology of a Pentecostal theology on the Lord's Supper? Well, I would like to say that there is, and Dr. Green really spells that out. He goes into the history of that, and deeper than what Dan does, he goes into 6 passages that he exegetes. And to be honest, after reading those 6 passages, those 6 exegetes that he looks at, I was convinced, pastorally, I was convinced that as a pastor, I am going to have to move towards offering communion to my church every week. That's how powerful that book affected me. And there's several things that Dan brings out and Chris brings out that I just want to talk about today. And that is, first of all, just the history of this sacrament. Dan does a wonderful job of going back and offering that. He also engages other traditions. He engages Roman Catholic tradition. He engages Eastern Orthodox. Now, just by engaging them, he's not saying that we agree with them. He's just pointing out what their beliefs are. For instance, Dan will talk about the Roman Catholic understanding of transubstantiation. He's not saying that we believe in that. He's just pointing that out. And I just want to say that because some people read that and they think that Dan's trying to make us Roman Catholic or something. And that's not the point. He's just simply engaging other traditions. Dan also does a wonderful job of talking about how this sacrament is a blessing. And the word we use for that is that it's efficacious. And really, that's a term used for all of these sacraments. How are participating in the sacraments efficacious? In other words, how are they spiritually beneficial? And I hope in your research papers you will bring that out. If you're writing on foot washing, if you're writing on baptism, or if you're writing on the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, I hope you will talk about how these practices are efficacious. Let me give you an example. For us, taking the Lord's Supper, and for the entire church, of course, it's very important. And if you are like me, you've probably heard pastors, or maybe you've said this before, that you have to make sure when you come to the table that you have all your sins covered, that you are clean, that you're prepared, because if you take the Lord's Supper in an unworthy manner, you could get sick or even die. I've heard that. I'm sure you have heard that, and we hear that all the time. And so we believe by taking the Lord's Supper, it can harm us. But what about participating in the Lord's Supper where it can bless us, where it's efficacious? And so I want you to explore ways that this meal, that this practice is efficacious. And speaking of it as a meal, there are some beautiful theologies about how this meal, of course, is a remembrance, right? Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. And so this meal, it takes us back, way back to Israel's past, back to the Passover, right? And it kind of brings us up into our New Testament understanding of what took place on the cross, the breaking of Jesus' body, the pouring out of his blood, but also the remembrance. Remember this as we participate in it. Also, we remember the future. We remember what Jesus has promised us, that we are moving towards a future where we will participate in the marriage supper of the Lamb and the great feast of gathering of all believers to that supper. And so there is this idea of this table, the Lord's table. It moves us back to the past as we reach out to what God has done. And also we reach towards the future, what God has promised to do. And it kind of converges there here at the table in the here and now as we participate in this. It's a beautiful picture, this idea, right, of perhaps the Eucharist is a time machine, right? That we can go back to the past or go into the future as we take this. And it's just this beautiful idea of what God has done, what God is doing, and what God will do. And so there's all kinds of theology about this. And Dan does a good job, I believe, in this chapter, bring that out. But also, just let me reiterate that Dr. Chris Green here, that really put me on the road towards Eucharistic and sacramental theology. So I highly recommend Chris's book, and I'm really looking forward to what you all have to do to engage this chapter. Let me just say one thing about the discussions. You're doing a wonderful job picking out quotes and kind of giving the synopsis of it, but there's still this place of offering 3 questions. I'm not asking you to quiz your fellow students. This isn't a quiz. What does Dan say that the 3 most important parts of the Eucharist is? Or I'm just kind of making that up, or whatever. I'm not asking you to quiz your students, or your fellow students. What I'm asking is, how does your reading of this chapter spark your imagination? How does it affect you? What questions does it bring up that Dan isn't addressing? That's what I'm looking at. They're kind of rhetorical questions, but they're questions that I hope you can help your fellow students engage in. And so, again, we're not looking for you to quiz your students. We have the book. We can read the book and we can find those answers. I'm looking for questions that reading this book creates in you that Dan doesn't ask. Perhaps this is a good way to say it. What questions do you have after reading the chapter that you would like to ask Dan? That'd be a good way to kind of approach that part. We've got 2 more weeks on that. I'd like to see you do that, because what that does, it helps me to see how these writings affect you. Those 3 questions are really what brings out the emotions, the thoughts, the theology that you are coming up with as you read. And so I know I'm making a big deal about that because it is for me, because I can quote the book, you can quote the book. We can all give a summary of it, but it's the questions that help me to see how this book is affecting you. Okay, enough said. Again, I'm looking forward to your discussions. If you have any questions about the assignments, whatever is due this week, the final paper or whatever, let me know. Also, I will put those 4 elements that I'm looking for in this paper on the dashboard, just to help you with that as well. Amen. Well, God bless you. I'll be praying for you. I hope you have a good week. We'll see you online. Bye-bye.